All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to the last set of talks for B-Sides Las Vegas 2022. This is Breaking Ground. One quick announcement though, if you are looking for the Exclave experience relocated to Almost Canada by T-Profit, you are in the wrong room. It has been moved to the Passwords Con in the Tuscany Ballroom. And those of you online too, make sure you're clicking on the right room. It's the Tuscany Ballroom now with Passwords Con. The website has the most up-to-date link, so just refer to that one. But welcome. This is, again, this is Breaking Ground. We have Shreyas and Shaun here. The title of their talk is Ransomware Emulation Done Right. A couple reminders before we begin. As always, thank you so much to our Diamond and Gold sponsors. Without their assistance, as well as all the volunteers, staff, and anyone who's involved with B-Sides Las Vegas 2022, this event certainly would have been possible. And I think I share the sentiment with a lot of you guys and a lot of other people here that I'm glad that this in-person event did indeed happen. And hopefully it'll happen for, the countless number of years down the road. But out of respect for the people on the live stream as well as for these speakers, please do make sure that your cell phones are at least silenced or ideally all the way turned off. And a reminder of the photo policy, you are not allowed to take photos without explicit permission of everyone in frame. So if it's okay with them, you can, but wouldn't run that risk. Now, one tiny change to how we've been doing things before. During the Q&A session, unfortunately now that we've run into a little bit of an issue with wireless mic problems. So if by the end you have a question, you are probably going to have to shout it. So for those of you in the back of the room, I'm not saying you have to move forward, but I would recommend it if you think you might have a question. And you guys by the end, if you guys could just repeat the question. Yeah, that'd be great for all those online. So without further ado, here's Shreyas and Shaun.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for coming. I know it's the end of the day, so let's get into it. We're going to be talking about ransomware emulation, and as always, want to start off, best defense is a good offense, and it's worth noting that internal security, using your red team and stuff, has massive benefits, so hopefully we could kind of show that with this talk. So my name is Shaun Jones. I'm a director at eBay. We're both from eBay, and I do a lot of more programs and projects, stuff like ransomware program, and Shreyas.
Right. Hey guys, my name is Shreyas Rami. I'm a senior detection engineer at eBay, mostly on the blue team, but I do a bunch of purple teaming as well with Shaun. So with that, let's kick this off. All right, so we know that ransomware is a problem. It's a huge problem. Google released a report that it analyzed around 80 million ransomware samples. Let's look at 5 months in let's look at 5 months in 2021. There are several companies that were hit by ransomware and they paid tens and millions of dollars in ransomware. Just look at Colonial Pipeline. They even made national news, and that was huge.
So eBay, much like all the companies, are kind of worried about this, and we don't want to get impacted because, loss of revenue and stuff like that. We do get hit, and customer data. So whenever we kind of look at the program, we just started with the idea of asking ourselves a couple of questions. The first being, are our employees susceptible? Do our controls and tools actually work? And do we actually respond in the best way? You don't want to be responding in the wrong way to ransomware. So with that in mind, we kind of started off with kind of 3 tracks. So track 1 is education. With this, we do a lot of tabletops with different teams and security awareness, the phishing emails everyone gets and stuff like that, and the annual training. We're not really going to talk about track 1 because it's not the interesting stuff. But track 2 was around controls and our visibility around our logs and alerting. So with that, we kind of do purple team exercises, which is going to be kind of a focus, and red team exercises. Red team exercises also help us with track 3, but which is response, but they're less to the same extent as our ransomware simulation because we only do a couple of boxes, not an entire load of employees with this stuff. So ransomware simulation, by the way, is just where we kind of simulate a ransomware attack within the organization to see kind of what happens. So to start off, we're going to talk about purple teaming. And I'm guessing everyone might know about it, so we can rush through it. This is basically blue team, red team get together. They plan an exercise. They agree on TTPs, what factors we're concerned about, and what kind of where we're going to do it. What's our focus of it? Because we have so many different environments, so we kind of tailor it to that. Next, red team goes ahead and does the actual activities. hack some stuff, break some stuff, and then with that, the blue team can then come along and examine our tooling and our telemetry, like our logs and stuff, see if it ultimately giving us a proper understanding of how resilient we are to an attack. And we do this through kind of just checking, and it's a continuous process. So red team might have to replay some stuff, and blue team comes back to it. So to start off with this, what we did was a load of research on it. We did a lot of blogs, read a lot of reports around stuff. We even looked at Twitter and Telegram. As you can see, this is Scythe's GitHub, and honestly, for any emulation stuff, they actually have pretty good list of TTPs for not just ransomware actors, but like other threats as well. So if you are doing kind of like emulation, it's a good place there to go. The next thing that we did was we acquired a large number of samples of ransomware. We predominantly got them from like VirusTotal, but there's a number of places you can get them. The idea with this was we did some reverse engineering to actually kind of see how they work, to figure out what exactly happens when these are executed. But you might not have like the capabilities to do like reverse engineering a malware. You might not have like the team possible to do that. So one thing you can also do is, if you know hashes, specific kind of ones that you want to look at, you can go to like AnyRun or Joe Sandbox, just Google the hash. Typically you'll end up finding it, and that way you get the dynamic analysis part done for you without the needing the kind of internal skills to help with that. So like with any of this stuff, we set up our test environment just to be safe. Our test environment was basically a Windows VM in my house at the time. We actually moved it to Azure now, to a standalone account, so it's a bit more safer. Basically with that, what we did was install our EDR tool and a load of other standard kind of build tools that we had, along with our logging and telemetry kind of agents as well to pull that stuff back. We did include our VPN. This only allows us to do on-off network testing. So we might want to test like a laptop being off network, because everyone's off the network now anyway with COVID. Or we might want to test like within our network to see if our actual our proxies and other controls actually work and detect stuff. The other reason we did a VM is snapshots. Basically, we can do a large amount of like adding additional tooling. So for us, we were doing a massive drive to push Sysmon across the organization. And we used this as a way of basically selling that drive that we were going for, and it worked quite well, which we'll talk about later. With that, we've done all our research. We went ahead and we started building our own ransomware. This is like the fun part. So I went ahead and I wrote basically a piece of ransomware in C#, included several TTPs. We added in some functionality like the ability to rotate ransomware nodes and to rotate the file extensions when we actually ran this, to make it a bit easier, because we want to see what would happen for specific ones, but not run actual ransomware at a time. Following that, we actually wrote one in Go, because Go was kind of getting a lot bigger back then, and we hadn't done any of that in our exercises. So I'm not Go. It was like my first dive at writing Go. So what I did was I used Bad Gopher by Andy J. Smith on GitHub, and I basically modified the code to make it match what we wanted to do and for the certain TTPs. Saying that though, you don't need to write your own ransomware. There's a lot of tools out there that you can use for this. I haven't used these, so I can't say if they're safe or not, but you should probably test them or read them before you run them. But there's a lot of options out there, so you don't need to spend the time doing your development. So let's get into it. So round one, what was one of the things we found?
Sure. So the first thing that we did was we went through the default TTPs that came with the EDR tool, and as you can see, like there were almost 2 million results. This is something that's not feasible to go through all of them. So we basically wanted a purple team exercise and to identify good high fidelity alerting around this. So we went ahead and ran the binary which Shaun had just created, which was customized, and the EDR system, which was Carbon Black, eventually detected it after some time. So that was awesome. So the test was complete, right, Shaun?
Yeah. No, sadly it wasn't complete. But as we know, if anyone looked at the Connie leaks, a lot of these actors were actually purchasing valid EDR tools and using them, which means they could figure out potentially what is getting flagged on and why it's getting caught. So we did a similar thing and we started looking into this, and it turns out what was catching us was the canary files. Now these are files, lots of EDR products do it, it's not just Current Black, but lots of products do this, and they basically have some files on the file system. If they start getting modified and renamed, they'll get flagged and they'll cause basically the parent process that's doing that to get killed because they suspect it's ransomware or some kind of malware. So with that in mind, we went and looked, and what we realized was it actually we were able to encrypt a lot of files on the file system. It was just when we hit a certain part, this canary files got hit, and then much like Sad Pikachu, I ended up no longer being happy because my ransomware didn't work. So I guess 60% of the time, canary files work every time, right? So following this, we went back, we made some modifications to our payloads, our ransomware. We come up with some canary file bypasses. So the first one is really easy. It's basically 6 lines of code. You could probably put it in less lines of code if you wanted. And this was basically, if the file name starts with a $ or a hash symbol, just skip the file, don't encrypt it. And this worked pretty well, and we were able to bypass the canary files, which was kind of fun. The second bypass we found that was, if we went into kind of a trusted process, so notepad.exe is kind of, we would basically spawn notepad.exe, inject our ransomware into it, and then we could basically even encrypt the canary files, and for some reason that didn't get flagged and our ransomware worked. It was pretty cool. We did report it. So round 3. Now this is something that we've been doing more and more of now, and it isn't just for ransomware, but it works pretty well, and this is just sandboxing. So what we do is we go to VirusTotal, we get our ransomware samples or other malware. We then run that in that test environment VM that I was talking about, and then we basically get the idea to see if our controls block or detect these samples, and if not, we can then figure out what is doing it. So the reason I love this is it's pretty safe because it's up in Azure, not connected to us. I don't need to do any work, which I love, and our blue team do this all themselves. So it allows us to do this continuously. Say like some intel comes in, they go grab the sample, they can go run it and write rules very quick around detection, which is great. So with detection, Shreyas, this.
All right. So with all the TTPs that we emulated earlier and which Shaun talked about, we are able to utilize a handful of them to build high fidelity detection rules. So I'm going to go over a few of them which I can talk to you about. So the first one is disabling of Windows Defender. So this is one of the most common techniques that ransomware uses and has been used by many malware families. So it's very basic, and it's a common behavior. If you see it in your network, then it certainly warrants an investigation. It's worth building an alert even if you don't use Windows Defender. As I said, like many malware families use this. So the next one was to detect any process injection. And this is another common technique used by malware families. And as Shaun mentioned, we used Notepad to inject another process and use that to emulate some ransomware behaviors over there. So in the screenshot over here, what you see over there is the display switch.exe, which was essentially to use the affected machines to change it to the ransomware message on the affected users. The third one that we worked on was to detect malicious certutle usage. Certutle is a standard binary that's available on Windows OS, which is known to be maliciously used by various ransomware actors. During the test, we did a couple of things. Firstly, we renamed the original binary so that we can evade detection. That's something that's very uncommon, and you should be looking into that if that happens. Secondly, we used the renamed binary to then decode another code, which was then executed for malicious purpose on these systems. And lastly, this was something that we experimented with. We wanted to see if we can use known ransomware extension, threat intel that was available, and build an alert around it. So eventually, we are not using it, but at the start, what we did was we tested and it worked pretty fine. There wasn't much noise around it and very low false positives. But as we increased our logging coverage to different zones in our environment, we started receiving a lot of benign and false positive activity. So standalone, I wouldn't 100% recommend, but by using it with another signal in your environment, you might be able to use that scenario to identify ransomware behaviors. Finally, we were able to emulate like 21 different attack techniques and 6 tactics. Some of the notable ones, as you can see, are like shadow file deletion and process injections. All right, and along with that, we were even able to identify some logging gaps in our existing Windows security logs. Like for example, the 468 event code, which is for process creations, we initially didn't have process command lines that were being logged. And if you know Windows logs, this is very important to log, as you can see a lot of malicious activity within the command lines over there. So this was something that we had to go back and change the policies around the logging on this security logs, and we were able to get everyone in line to approve it and get forward with it. So that was pretty huge. And secondly, we were able to showcase value from the sysmon logs, and as it actually complemented the Windows security logs. So this exercise was like a leverage for us to push forward the additional logging that we were requesting. And overall, it's a huge win for the team, the Blue team over there. All right, Shaun.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about simulation now. Now, simulation is something that basically, I had this idea and I really wanted to do it. And if you just go ask if you can kind of go ransomware the company, you're probably going to get told no. So what I did was I got with a load of stakeholders, and this included like the head of IT, someone from legal, and communications as well. And what we did was we got together, we planned it out, we made sure we had a whole list of concerns, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And once we had that, we kind of presented it to the CISO and the CTO around getting permission to do this. They ended up having to go ask the CEO for permission, and so he approved it as well. And basically, once we got all approvals, it was a case of just executing the ransomware on our victims. The whole point of this was to basically understand how, as a company, we would respond to a ransomware attack, which is something that is quite hard to emulate. And as you will find out, we learned a lot from this. So the concerns, a couple of big concerns on this was someone taking a picture and tweeting it, or someone put it on Facebook. Again, leaked to the media that eBay got ransomware. That could have quite big effect on us. So we didn't want that happening. With that, we kind of got some pre-planned communications written by our kind of marketing PR team. The mental health of the victims. People don't want to feel responsible for stuff, especially ransomware. And depending on who you target, it could be quite bad. So we made the decision to basically only target directors and above within the company, which are quite high-level people, and they're typically used to kind of stress and to understand the situation. The other thing we were worried about was like disruption of work. Our leadership accepted that as a case. They were like, disruption of work, we'll just do it for like 4 hours was the max we were allowed to block users, basically. And the fear of it kind of spreading around and infecting other people within our network as well was a concern. So with that said, here's the message, and I know a common question that I always get asked is, did I actually get Bitcoin? I didn't. Sadly, no one paid. But on a Wednesday at like 9:05, this is what people saw on their screens, on their desk, and these are pictures taken that were sent to our kind of CSERT team with people reporting it. We had a lot of emails, a lot of panicked people around this. It was a high-octane thing, and I was on PTO that day, so no one could ask me if I was doing something, which is funny. So with that, here's kind of like high-level timeline of what this whole process looked like, because you might want to do this in your own organization. It started off with a lot of planning, as I already said. We then went and did a slide deck to the CTO and the CISO asking permission. This was... Originally, we only asked to do it to around 5 to 10 people, and they were like, let's do it to like 60 people. Well, it was like more than 60 people across the organization, which we were like, oh, okay, this might get bad. So with that, we agreed on like conditions, like I said, like a 4-hour window and our targets, and we ended up basically having to do the hard part after that, and that was building the actual ransomware. So for this, I read it in C# because I just like C#. We decided to impersonate REvil because at the time they were very in the media, very public and stuff, so it was like a good thing to do. To stop the kind of idea of it infecting other users and stuff, what we did was we took the username, the host name, we basically generated a hash from that, and then we hard-coded hash values into the payload. The reason we did it like kind of complicated and we didn't just do username, host name was we wanted to see if our blue team actually got to the stage of reverse engineering the actual malware. Along with this, we did hard code the actual execution times. So start time was like 9:05 and then end time was in the afternoon. We originally were trying to figure out how to deploy this, and so what we did was we got someone from our IT team who runs SCCM, and we just asked them if they would run it for us, and they were like, what? So they set out for us, they got it basically deploying at 9 o'clock, and then we executed the attack. That was honestly, executing the attack was the easiest part, but it was very tense in the morning. Following that, we basically called off the exercise, and fair play to our blue team, they were able to discover the payload and who made the SCCM job, which happened to be our friend in IT, and then they began taking actions such as locking his account and talking to HR about it. So as soon as that started happening, we were like, hey, let's call the exercise off. And it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours into the exercise, we decided to end it because this stuff was going on. We didn't want him getting in trouble. So following that, the most important part of this whole process was to perform an after-action review. And this was where I myself, with our CSERT team lead, basically got together and we made an RCA document, root cause analysis, and basically we went ahead and we interviewed the victims. That's an important thing to do if you do this, because you learn a lot about how they think and how they would go about reporting it, what they were doing, and you end up finding a lot of stuff that you wouldn't have normally, because you think, they'll call CISA. They don't. They call lots of other teams. They call like help desk, physical security and stuff. They don't know what to do. The next thing, because we had a lot of calls go to our actual help desk, and there was some issues with our help desk affecting our investigation process. Basically, we interviewed them as well. We found out what happened, what their thing was, and we ended up improving there, which Shreyas will talk about in a second. We also interviewed the analysts, not just the people who were looking into where the payload was and where it was coming from, but the people taking the calls and dealing with the victims, because it's very high stress and everyone's like running around, kind of thing. So it was like really good. With all this stuff, we then basically had to present the findings to our CISO and our CTO, and this is some of the lessons we learned from it.
Right. So what we learned, out of the 60 plus people that we targeted, like 92% of them reported back, which looks bad when you look at it, but we later found out the remaining people who didn't respond like were on PTO that day, so hard luck. The first report was reported back to the CERT team within probably a minute, under a minute, because we had our senior director like in the office, and when she was hit at 9 a.m., she would just go to the SOC team and get them into high alert immediately. Lastly, the blue team was able to identify the ransomware almost within an hour, and then we were taking remediation steps after that. So, which is great. We had people come back from their PTOs just to help them out over there. So that was pretty good engagement, as the alert was pretty high severity. Secondly, one thing that we didn't plan for was the number of phone calls that were reporting it back. It turns out that we didn't have a system in place to handle 60 plus calls to the CERT team, and luckily we discovered it during the exercise and were able to remediate it by before we had a real one earlier. So. The next issue that we found was that the help desk staff was asking the users to shut down their machines and hand over the machines for investigation. But in reality, that's not the best practice. You could actually lose your evidence during that time frame, and rather than you want to have the EDR system, isolate the machines and do the investigative task after that. And lastly, during big incidents, we tend to include a lot of SMEs from different areas to help them out, to help us out. And this was one of the cases where one of the SMEs who was an admin and who helped Shaun to deploy the ransomware across all the machines was present. And as we found out that this was done using SCCM, we actually had to create another bridge and let the initial user on the older bridge, so that keep up the appearance and make sure that the insider is not aware of what we are doing next. All right, with that, Shaun?
Yeah, that's something you don't want, by the way. You don't want the person doing the attack on your bridge when you're investigating. So we're going to talk about Red Team. I'm not going to dive into any of the details of what we did, but just at a high level, this is basically where one of our Red Teamers will come along, compromise some systems, and if we're emulating a specific threat, depending on that, we'd end up deploying the ransomware. And then the idea being that we'd understand our detection and response. These are more kind of isolated to like 1 or 2 boxes that aren't critical, because we don't want to impact business, and it's ransomware and people will run around and be scared. So we tend not to do that. That's why we took the simulation approach, because it was a lot safer. Following this, we present our findings, we do some remediation work. So something that we've been doing, and we've been like for new things, and like Log4j was kind of like an example of one of these, and I'll give another example in a minute, is this idea of using Intel-driven response, and we ended up like having our own process around this. So what typically would happen is we'll get threat intel, or something will be like a news or trend, and this will ultimately end up pointing to a new threat. Like you would expect, we go and do our threat hunting for that. We go to make sure we don't have it in our environment and we're not already affected by it. Then we end up like, applying fixes, trying to add blocks for IOCs, taking those steps, as well as looking at basically understanding if we already have rules in place to detect this and be able to block it. Now, previously, this was kind of just all blue team. What we've been doing more and more now is including the red team in this process. So it's ended up being more focused purple team exercises. And now these are not huge, kind of like maybe a day of work for the red team and stuff. But the idea being that we can test things before they happen. So we can test our rules, test blocks are working, as well as being able to test any fixes that we are deploying before they get pushed out, because we're quite a big company, so pushing out a fix that doesn't work or breaks something is kind of bad. So with that in mind, I'm going to dive into an example of this. And one of the more recent ones that we did was the Microsoft diagnostic tool, RCE, for Yona. And basically, this was a URL handler bug that allowed you to remotely execute code. So, and was being exploited in the wild. Basically, a Word document, you open it, it executes, it calls that URL handler through OLE, and you end up with RCE. And at the time, there was no patch, and it hadn't gone public at this point. A friend of mine, Richard Warren, told me about it. Following this, with the hash, we went after VirusTotal because we love VirusTotal, and we managed to get ourselves a sample of this malware. Now, you can do this with like zip. Basically, a docx is just a zip file, so you can use that to kind of open them up. But I love Cerberus Suite. It's really good, and it has some stuff where it will like tell you if it's doing external references, external calls to stuff. And in this case, you just end up clicking that rather than having to look through it. But in this case, there was an OLE pointing at this domain. So with that, so now we kind of understood how it was being executed when you open the Word document. And basically, we took that URL, went to VirusTotal, and we were able to get the actual exploit from there. So we basically decided to make our own version of this because we already had everything. We went ahead, changed out the URLs to be ours because we didn't want to send it to the attacker. And we ended up changing the actual execution from the PowerShell invoke expression to just be count because, it's where it's at. So we ended up running this, and we found that we were vulnerable to it, and it did execute perfectly. So with that in mind, we went about writing some rules.
Right, thanks. So as the red team was running the exploit and testing this out, the blue team on the side was trying to find out all the IOCs, and we were able to find a bunch of them, which we then used to develop watchlist on our EDR system and use that watchlist to scan across the whole environment. Luckily, there wasn't any results, so we are pretty happy with that. Next, so when we wanted to test this, we found out that this exploit could be tested using, could be executed using a .rtf file or a .docx file. Hence, we wanted to test them out. So we started with a .rtf file, which got detected by our EDR system, Carbon Black. And since this was like a very similar IOCs from like a older CVE from 2017, the EDR system was able to block it. Secondly, when we ran the .docx file, it did not block it, and we had to create a rule around it to see if there was any hits around it, and we even eventually reported it back to Carbon Black on that. All right, we eventually also found out that Microsoft had released a workaround, which was essentially that they were recommending us to delete the registry file registry key in order to block this exploit to be working. So the red team wanted to test this out. We deployed this on a bunch of test machines. Red team tested it out and made sure everything was working. So once that was complete, we then deployed the fix using SCCM to more than 15,000 hosts in our environment. So in summary, we were able to utilize the workaround and build detections within the first 48 hours of it being publicly disclosed. 6 people from 4 different teams were involved to get this work done, and all of this was tested and validated by the red team. So, Shaun, you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah. So one of the things that we kind of want to call out in this is that collaboration between your teams, red and blue, like you said, the best defense is offense. Collaboration between those teams actually does have a significant impact, and we're doing a lot of stuff within our eBay to make sure this is the case, and we test a lot of things out. So we see a lot of major benefits. We're able to move faster as well with our detections and rules and blocking these threats as they come about, like the CVE one we just gave. Next, you might not have a red team, you might not have people who can reverse engineer malware and stuff, but sandboxing is very low cost, and it's a really easy way to kind of test your controls and get that kind of insight into whether or not some tool that you're spending a lot of money for actually works compared to not. So I would highly recommend people do like sandboxing with their normal kind of EDR solution and stuff in it, and just get malware samples and drop them in and see what happens as a regular kind of thing. Next, the simulation showed us stuff that we would have never found normally, or we would have only found out about when it was an actual incident, which, you know, so it was kind of like really good on that side, and it showed us a lot of gaps, and we ended up improving quite a bit from that. Next, this kind of program overview that we're done with like the pulp teaming, the simulation stuff, and the red team, it's safe. It's meant as like a safe process to just like doing red teaming without doing red teaming to affect the organization, especially with like ransomware. You can't deploy that across all your hosts. So it would work with other threats like Insider. So we recommend, like, you know, you could take that kind of format that we've got here and use it for anything. So with that, just want to say like thank you for coming to our talk. I know it's the last one of the day, so appreciate that. And yeah, and I guess questions. Oh, yeah. So, any questions?
So when you were building the malware specifically, did you have sort of a secondary objective of making it more difficult to be reversed, or did you think, oh, you know, that's valuable time, we don't want our researchers doing that, we want them to just try it and get the point? What were your thoughts on obfuscating it enough to make it annoying for the version or not?
Sure. So the question was, did we do anything around the obfuscation of our actual ransomware when we made it? When I made it, I didn't. I'd been running basically how to reverse .NET applications with our blue team for a while. So the idea was this was kind of like a live fire opportunity for them to actually learn and put those skills that they learned into kind of use. This is the first time we kind of did it, so we decided make it easy, but like there was some, like to get the username and the host name, they'd have to look at what we were doing for hashing and reverse that. So it would have been good, but yeah, maybe next time we're going to make it a little bit difficult to see kind of if they have improved and make it harder, but for this case, no. Cool.
Follow up with that. Do you think it's important to keep it kind of not so time consuming that they're spending like a day on it, or is there a balance? What's the balance for you on that?
Yeah, in this case, it was more, the question was the focus around timing, making it more difficult for them so they had to spend more time reversing it or not, and what the benefits and stuff would be. So for us, it was more, we wanted to kind of see how fast they could get to it. In this case, the exercise was mainly focused around seeing that response. And we had like a short window, and we did revisit the actual malware and we went through it with them as well after the exercise. But they would have quickly found out it was the red team because there was some comments in the code that said it was us, and it was like, congrats kind of thing. But we didn't want to like make it too hard for them and like spend loads of time doing it. Because, you know, we're a big company and we have a lot of incidents, so you got to play the risk reward of impacting your security team too much. Yeah.
It's more of a management question than I guess a technical one, but with your after action, did you discuss at all about the pros and cons of paying a ransom as opposed to mitigating it or any other way of responding to it?
Sure. The question was around, during the process, do we ever think about like paying the ransom? In this case, we typically have tabletops, know the education part, and we do those with our executive team, and they go through the whole process of when the incident would happen at a high level, this is what we would do, and then they're given like the option of like, you know, pay or not, and then they go through the whole process. And this is kind of more of a legal question, because, you know, with the whole government regulations on it, because I think they class ransomware actors as pretty much funding terrorism if you do pay the ransom and stuff like that, I think. So that's more of our legal team to cover that stuff than us, if that makes sense. That answered it? Cool.
Well, I mean, I realize it's more of a legal question. I'm just curious what you came up with on that. Because like JD, for example, last year, their ransomware attack, I believe they did pay it. And there's like various cost estimations as to whether it's more prudent to do X or Y.
Yeah, there's companies that you can hire to pay the ransom for you that are not based in the US, as I understand it, and that's how you can get past some of that stuff. But again, it's like more of the executive leadership, legal counsel kind of decision to be made on that front. So, cool. Any other questions? I can't see any. Cool. Well, awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our talk. I know it's like beer time now, right? So,
Thank you, guys.
thank you.
Thank you.